Murder attempt survivors, what happened? 9 years ago, buddy got jumped at a house party. I jumped in to pull the guy off of him. Attacker ended up pulling out a knife and shanking me in the stomach before fleeing to a getaway vehicle. Police were called. Caught the guy. We were supposed to come into court to point at him and be like he did it, but the day before he pleaded guilty. No idea what happened to the guy after that or what his punishment was, but he probably didn't learn anything from the situation. Me? I feel completely fine. Sometimes I forget that I even got stabbed. I feel a little uneasy whenever someone has a knife in their hand and it's not dinner time, but that's about it as far as trauma goes. A pregnant drunk lady called an ambulance. I was working with a junior colleague but a female one. The patient said she thought she was in labor and was sat on the floor, legs open, knees bent, with a blanket over her lower part. There was a small table next to her, glass top wooden coffee table thing. My colleague asked to examine her and for some reason she got angry and insisted I examine her, not my female colleague. After a bit of back and forth I knelt down and went to lift the blanket to have a look when there was a sudden crash. My colleague had put her foot through the glass table and was standing on the patient's hand, which had a huge knife in it. Turns out she wanted to stab a paramedic, and when we turned up she chose me. My colleague saw it just in time and saved my life. Patient had already had several children who were in care and had fetal alcohol syndrome. I was asked for a statement when the next one was born and they were also taken into care. She got away with the premeditated attempted murder on grounds of mental health. I was working as a support worker for people with mental and physical disabilities. My client had schizophrenia and BPD due to childhood and substance abuse. She stabbed me 3 times in the chest, once in the heart, penetrating my right ventricle and severing a major artery, after I advised her against a medication, nicotine gum. I almost died. Doctors said that it was a miracle I survived, with a 3% survival rate due to the severity of my injuries. That only happened back in August this year. I'm still in recovery and I'm dealing with PTSD. She's completely ruined my life, and I'm now struggling with my identity and what I want to do in life. I was 17 at the time. I was wicked sick one weekend and my mother decided I needed to go to the hospital. She had been drinking all day, as she was a terrible alcoholic. It turned out that I had strep throat. So they're typing out my discharge paperwork and my mother approached the desk where the nurse was sitting. Clearly stinking of alcohol, the nurse told my mother that she wouldn't be allowed to drive me home because she was clearly intoxicated. This sent my mother into a drunken rage, swearing and threatening the nurse, who told her if she left the police would be called. My mother grabbed me and hurries me into the car. I start yelling at her about how irresponsible she is and how she is ruining her life with alcohol. This pisses her off even more. We only live less than a mile away, but my mother has taken a different route than normal. When I ask why, she just says it's the long way and she doesn't want to get caught. As we're traveling down this dark, main back road, she begins speeding like crazy. We were doing at least 90 miles per hour when she looks over at me with a blank face and says I'm sorry. She then pulled the e-brake and cut the wheel, sending us flying off the road. The next thing I remember is sitting in the front seat of a pickup truck with an EMT shining a flashlight in my eyes along who the president was. I responded that Bill Clinton was the president, 2000. Apparently she had crashed us into a huge rock at the end of someone's property, directly on my side of the car. Apparently I crawled over her and staggered to the door of the property to ask for help. They put us in different ambulance and we headed back to the hospital we just left. Upon arrival, the nurse my mother fought with said I knew you'd be back. My mother, in a drunken semi-conscious state, kept saying I'm sorry I tried to kill you, I love you, over and over. She suffered several broken ribs, a broken collarbone, broken nose and cracked vertebrae. I had a concussion and some cuts on my face from the door window basically exploding on impact with a rock. She was sentenced to some alcohol program through the courts and some community service. She suffered severe depression and 6 months after this she took her own life in another car accident. She actually asked me if I wanted to go for a ride with her that night and I told her no, I'll see you when you get home. That was the last thing I ever said to her. My mom was incredibly abusive. On one occasion, I was around 12 and she came into my room while I was sleeping and stabbed me in the chest with a kitchen knife, puncturing my lung. I didn't know this at the time. Obviously this woke me up and I just rolled out of bed and ran around the house screaming. Someone on our road noticed the noise and called the police. Just before the police arrived, she started choking me and I lost consciousness. I later woke up in the hospital and, mostly, recovered. She's now in jail. This is not the only time that she tried, but it was the most dramatic and came the closest to actually killing me. Not me but my friend's mom. A co-worker of hers was stalking her, obsessed. Convinced he was in love with her and nobody else deserved her, that kind of thing. Eventually he came to their office with a revolver. She was bending down to put files away, or something similar. He quickly approached her from behind and shot her in the back before immediately shooting himself in the head. She survived obviously, though the wounds were significant. Incredibly fortunate she wasn't hit in the spine or major organs. I often wonder how different it would have played out if she had been standing, or facing him. More than likely she would be dead. This was before my friend was born, and his mom made a mostly full recovery. Still has chronic pain and PTSD, but she can walk and has a job. Not reclusive or unfriendly to strangers. Terrified of guns, of course, But that seems fair. Both my friend and her are extremely lucky. Edit, spelling. At the beginning of October my husband was trying to buy a PS5 on Letgo. He wanted to make sure it actually worked, so he gave the guy our address. I told him a dozen times that he was going to get robbed. He still had the kid come over. As soon as he got there he pulled a gun, grabbed the cash and shot twice. One hit my husband in the abdomen. The second went through the stairs behind him and traveled 30 to 40 feet to the kitchen. I heard the commotion and ran downstairs and chased him away from the house. We got to the front gate and he pulled his gun again and shot at me. He missed my head by less than 2 inches. He was caught and is being charged as an adult, 16, for 2 counts of attempted murder and a variety of other charges.